Lesson 5.1 and 5.2 focus on factors and divisibility. Now, when we're factoring out a number, we can use our divisibility rules to help us. Let's take a look at what it means to factor a number and what factors are. We're going to start with looking at the number 12. Okay, here's our number 12. And when we factor out a number, we want to see what two numbers can we multiply together to get 12 as a product. Okay, so we can always think about our factors, or I guess the best way to always think about factors, and the best place to always start is with 1. We know that 1 times any number is going to equal that number. So when we take a look at 12, we can do 1 times 12, and that will give us 12. 1 is always a great place to start. 1 is always going to be a factor of all of the numbers that we're going to look at. Okay? Then we should go up to 2 and think about 2. Is 2 a factor of 12? Can we multiply anything times 2 to get 12? Yes, we can. 2 times 6 is going to get us to 12. Then we should go up to 3 and think, is there anything that we can multiply times 3 to get 12? Yes, there is. 3 times 4 will give us 12. Now, my next number that I would look at would be 4, but considering 4 is all the way already over here, I am done factoring my number because I'm starting to go up in my numbers and then I'm going to start to go back down. So when I write my factors, lots of times they're going to want us to write them in order from least to greatest. So I have 1, that's my first factor, it's over here. Then 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. Those are all of the factors of our number 12. Those are the numbers that we can multiply times another number to get the product of 12. So when we're listing our factors, we have to find all of the facts, all of the factor pairs, and our factor pairs are the two numbers that we can multiply together in order to get that product. Okay, now let's take a look at our divisibility rules, and we're going to talk about how our divisibility rules can help us in finding our factors of our number. Our divisibility rules. We're going to start with the rule for 2. Now here's our divisibility rule for 2. If the last place value is even, that means if it's 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8, then our number is going to be divisible by 2. So if we look back at our number 12 again, our last place value would be our 2. Since our 2 is even, our ones place is even, then the number 12 is going to be divisible by 2. Let's take a look at our divisibility rule for 3. Our divisibility rule for 3 says the sum of the digits is divisible by 2. And what that means is we'll look at our number and we have to add up each place value. So in this case we have a 1 and we have a 2. If we add 1 plus 2, we get 3. Then we have to see, is 3 divisible by 3? So can I divide 3 evenly into 3? Would this statement here go in evenly? And yes, it does. It gets me 1. So our number is also divisible by 3. And we found that out when we were finding our factors. Okay, so that's our divisibility rule for 3. Here's our divisibility rule for 4. In order to find if our number is divisible by 4, what we're going to do is take a look at our number again. We have the number 12. And in this case, we're going to focus on the tens place. So we're going to double our tens place, which means we're going to multiply our tens place times 2. So 1 times 2 is 2. Then we add our ones place. And in this case, we get 4. Then we have to think, is 4 divisible by 4? So can I do this and get an even number? Yes, I can. I get 1 whole. So this number, 12, is going to be divisible by 4. Let's take a look at our rule for 5. Our rule for 5 is the number ends in a 0 or a 5. So if we're looking at the number 12, we end in a 2. That is not a 0 or a 5. So 12 is not divisible by 5. I could not do 12 divided by 5 and get a whole number. I would have a whole number and a remainder. So nope, we are not divisible by 5. Let's take a look at a few more divisibility rules. Let's look at number 6. Now for 6, we have to go back and look at 2 and 3. So if our number is divisible by 2 and 3, then it's also going to be divisible by 6. So if we go back to when we found our factors, we saw that our number was divisible by 2 and our number was divisible by 3. It was also divisible by 6. If we looked at our divisibility rules, the last place value is even. It is. The sum of our digits is divisible by 3, and we found up top here that it was. So our number is divisible by 2 and 3, so it's also going to be divisible by 6. Okay? Our divisibility rule for 8. Now, 8's a rule that doesn't really help us too much because we're still going to have to do division. If the last 3 digits are divisible by 8, then our number is divisible by 8. So if we look back at our number 12, we don't even have 3 digits here, but 8 does not go into 12 evenly, so no, this number is not divisible by 8. Our divisibility rule for 9. Our divisibility rule for 9 is very similar to our divisibility rule for 3. The sum of the digits is divisible by 9. So if the sum of the digits, that means if I take 12 and add 1 plus 2, because those are our 2 digits in our number, in this case I get 3, is 3 divisible by 9? Is that going to get me an even number? No, it is not. It is not going to get me a whole number, rather. It's going to get me a fraction or something that's less than 1. So no, our number is not divisible by 9. And last divisibility rule that we're going to go over is our divisibility rule for 10. And this one's pretty simple. Our divisibility rule for 10 is if the number ends in a 0, then we're divisible by 10. In this case, 12 does not end in a 0, so we are not divisible by 10. Let's take a look at how our divisibility rules can help us when we're finding our factors of a number. Let's take a look at a pretty large number. We're going to look at number 54. Now, it's not a huge number, but it's still relatively big. And we want to figure out what numbers go evenly into 24. So what numbers are divisible by 24? We're also going to try and find all of our factors. So remember when we started with 12, we always started with 1 because every single number has 1 as a factor. So let's start with 1. And we know that 1 times the number that we're given, these are both always going to be factors, 1 and 54. But now we can use our divisibility rules to figure out if any other number is a factor of 54. So we're going to look at the number 2. And we're going to think about our divisibility rule for 2. It said if the ones place, or the last digit, is even, then our number is divisible by 2. Well, 4 is an even number, so 54 is going to be divisible by 2. Now, all I have to do now is figure out, well, what times 2 gives me 54. In order to do that, I do have to do some division. So off to the side, I'm going to divide 2 into 54. Because I know that 2 is a factor, so there's going to be another factor that I would have to multiply times 2, or with 2, in order to get the product of 54. Right? So when I divide 54 divided by 2, I'm going to get 2 here. 2 times 2 is 4. I subtract. I'm left with 1. I bring down my 4. 2 goes into 14 7 times. All right. So 2 times 27, those are both 2 more factors. Now, next one I'm going to look at is 3. And I have to think, is 3 a factor of 54? Can I multiply 3 times anything to get me 54? My divisibility rule for 3 was, if the sum of the digits is divisible by 3, then my number is divisible by 3. So I'm going to take 54, and I'm going to add my 2 digits up. That means I'm going to add 5 plus 4. And 5 plus 4 gives me 9. Is 9 divisible by 3? Yes, it is. So my number is going to be divisible by 3. Now I have to figure out, well, 3 times what gives me 54? Because 3 is going to be a factor. So again, I have to divide. 3 goes into 5 one time. 3 times 1 is 3. I subtract, I'm left with 2, and I bring down my 4. 3 times 8 gives me 24. 3 times 8 is 24. I subtract, and I'm left with 0. Okay, so 3 times 18, 3 and 18, when I multiply them together, I'm going to get 54. That was my divisibility rule for 3. Now let's take a look at my divisibility rule for 4. I'm going to start and I'm going to put 4 here. I don't know if I can multiply anything times it yet in order to get 54, but I'm going to write it there just in case I do need it. All right, now my divisibility rule for 4 was if I double my tens and add my ones, that has to be divisible by 4. So when I double my tens, that would mean 5 times 2. That gives me 10. And I add 4 more, that gives me 14. Is 14 divisible by 4? No, it's not. So 4 is not a factor. I'm going to cross it out. I'm going to look at 5. My divisibility rule for 5 was if my number ends in a 5 or a 0, then it's going to be divisible by 5. It does not. It ends in a 4. So 54 is not divisible by 5. All right, let's look at 6. Maybe 6 is going to be a factor. My divisibility rule for 6 was if 2 and 3 are both divisible by my number, then 6 is as well. I just gave a check because 2 is divisible by 50, or 54 is divisible by 2, and 54 is divisible by 3. So 6 is going to be a factor. So in order for me to figure out what its partner factor is, I'm going to have to divide. And so I'm going to set my division, 54 divided by 6. And that's one of my basic facts that I know, and that gets me 9. So 6 times 9 gets me 54. Okay. Now I'm going to move on to, I have to think about 7 and think about if there's anything that I can multiply times 7 to get me 54. There is not, because 7 times 7 is 49, and then if I add 7 more to that, I get 56. So 7 is not a factor. 8, is 8 going to be a factor? Well, I could divide and think about my 8 facts. Is there anything that gets me close to 54? When I'm dividing by 8, I know that 8 times 6 is 48. 8 times 7 is 56. So no, I can't get to 54. I go to 9, and I already have 9 written down right here. And I can look at 10 next. 10 times anything get me 54? No, because my 4 or my ones place would have to be a 0. So I have all of my factors of 54. Now I'm going to write them down in a line from least to greatest. I'm going to start with 1. And here's a little trick when we're writing our factors down from least to greatest. I can write my smallest factor and my largest factor down, and just separate them and leave a big space in between so I can fill that space in. So I did my first factor pair. I'm going to do my second factor pair, 2 and 27. My third factor pair, 3 and 18. And my fourth factor pair, 6 and 9. So here are all of my factors of 54. Quite a lot. Now, it's important to remember when we're doing our factors, think about those divisibility rules. Use a divisibility rules sheet if you have one to help you along the way. That'll help make sure that you don't skip any factors.